Hello, hello. So today we will be wrapping up our starter family overview with appropriately going last with Yzmir here. So if you're not familiar with what these videos are, we're just going to go through the families of all the cards that were revealed for the Yzmir starter deck. So that'd be the common and the two rare variants. Kind of just talk about them for a little bit, and then at the end we're going to imagine that we bought 3 of these starters, right? Just as kind of a budget way to start our collection, and now we need to build a deck out of it, which means we would need to pick 5 of the 8 rares that we're going to play, and any associated changes that we need to make that work. So, once again, if you don't know what Altered is, there will be a pile of links in the description. Quick rules of how to play video, a link to their Kickstarter, which is now live, so you can check all of that out. But yeah, nothing much to do but to just get underway here. So first and foremost, we have our hero Akesha and her companion Taru. Akesha, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. She gets to exhaust herself to say, no, it's your turn, provided she has the first player token. So functionally, she gets to always go second, but when she does go first, she'll have the option to sneak in, say, a sabotage play before she does that. This Yzmir deck is really all about what I've been calling time advantage, just trying to make it so that you are going last in the round, that by the time your opponent is done using up all of their mana, doing everything they can do, you still have 3, 4, 5, 6 mana remaining to survey the field, look at what you've got, figure out your options, and just make the best decisions, knowing most of what or all of what your opponent has done already. In exchange for that, Yzmir's characters kind of have less stats, but they do have a bunch of removal abilities. They have some sabotage, a bunch of little tricks, some card advantage type stuff to try to mix and match that with their time advantage theme to figure out how to win the game. So getting onto the cards themselves, the first one we have here is Studious Disciple, and right away we can see the theme. We are getting less stats than we normally would, right? For our 1/1, usually a 1/1 would just be a 1/1/1. We've seen a couple, at least one blank 1/1/1/1 in other factions, right? But in this case, you just get a 0/1/1. Now, you do get a little benefit where you can use the support ability from your reserve to get a bonus mana on a spell play. But, that in and of itself is kind of like trading away a little bit of your card supply in order to do that. Arguably a fair exchange on its own, but still kind of interesting to have in your deck. You're kind of investing a mana now, planning to burn the card to get the mana back later. Now, the rare upgrade gives you this alternate mode where you can play the Disciple from your reserve and still get that mana refund. So now you're kind of getting a free 0/1/1 out of it. Really interesting. I kind of would have to play with it to make any sense out of that. It's a little hard to rate these like 1 mana support abilities without playing with them a bit. The faction shift is into Lyra. Faction which has a decent number of spells. Lyra might benefit from the 0 cost here. That might be part of what's going on here. Lyra has some 0 stat, the 0 in Forest, right? Lyra has some thematics around that we haven't really seen the fully fleshed out, like what the hero is for that, if there is one, for instance. But kind of an interesting faction shift for them. Moving on. The second card we're going to look at is Tooth Fairy. So Tooth Fairy is pretty simple. It's a 2-cost 1/1/1, right? Again, a little inefficient, but in this case you are getting a Sabotage. So normally Sabotage kind of seems to cost 1 of each stat in a lot of places that shows up. So Tooth Fairy is actually kind of on rate the first time you play it. But the second time you play it, it is still a 2-cost 1/1/1 with nothing bonus attached. So that's where your Yzmir inefficiency comes in, but certainly paying 2 for a Sabotage is really good. A lot of the Sabotage cards in other factions cost 3 or 4, and you have to play them, because of Sabotage, you have to play it really early in the day, and that can kind of, make it pretty clear, what your mana math is, what you're going to be able to do for the rest of the day. Your opponent can kind of take advantage of that. But being able to get it for 2 cost is really nice. The rare upgrade turns it into an on-curve character. Right now it costs 1 coming out of the reserve, as you would expect. I think a lot of these Yzmir rare upgrades are going to be like this, where it takes their normally, quote-unquote understated character and turns it into a more normal stat rate, which is still not going to be as good as another faction's rares, but at least now you have a card that can compete with their commons, which is still going to be, more than half their deck, right? Faction shift into Bravos in case they want you know, a cheap, weirdly stat inefficient sabotage option. Kind of interesting for them because your Bravos might decide that they can make up giving up a little bit of stats in order to get this effect, because they're generally more efficient otherwise outside of this guy, right? Alright, next we have a pretty cool one, the Kadigan Mage Dancer. I was hoping not to stumble over that. 2/1/1/1/1. But when you play a spell, he gets a boost. So provided this is one of the first characters you play for the day, and you're planning to use at least one spell, this guy's perfectly fine. He's even good. He's even like a little above rate. You play him one out of your reserve, you play a spell at some point, he's a 2/2/2 for your 1 mana. Pretty nice for Yzmir, provided you're running enough spells that you're reasonably certain you can take advantage. Can't always do that on like day 1, day 2, that sort of thing, so that's a bit of the downside here. If you are, you know, as a day 1 card, he's kind of terrible, right? You're paying 2 for a 1/1, and that's just your life, but you know, in the mid to late game, he's very, very efficient. The rare upgrade here, if you manage to get 3 boosts on him somehow, which I guess means playing 3 spells or otherwise finding ways to boost him. I'm guessing there's another Yzmir hero that can help with this in some way. But if you do manage to do it, you get to draw a card, just like fully get a refunded, really net a card, because you're going to get to play this guy twice, so each time you play him, it's sort of like half a card. If on one of those plays you boost him 3 times, then you're going to go up on cards while also getting this body out there, which, as described before, can be pretty efficient. The very funny faction shift is into Lyra. We talked about this with the Lyra deck. Navenka's going to roll some dice. This is almost a much more controllable version of this character that Lyra gets to have. I mean, not controllable in the sense you're rolling dice, but you have a dice roll right on your character, for instance. So you know you're pretty much going to be able to get at least 1/1/1 out of this. Probably more if you're playing really the full theme deck. So a very nice card for Lyra there. Next up is the Yzmir Stargazer. Common is, you know, another pseudo-understated character for Yzmir. You do get a nice bonus. 1/2/1 for 1 out of the reserve is good, right? That's certainly nice rate. The upfront is a little not good, right? The 1/2/1 for 2 is less good, but at least you're getting a little counterbalance on that. It's fine. You know, it's nothing to write home about, but it's certainly a fine card to have in your deck, especially you see a lot of these 1-cost characters in Yzmir, and what those are doing in this deck is giving you an extra way to say, no, it's your turn, right? You can use Akesha to do it. If you play a 1-cost character, you're also kind of getting to do that, because you're only going down 1 mana, and you're getting, you know, a character out in an expedition, and making your opponent, all right, do something else, right? Use more of your mana, get more and more behind on this mana count, so that you run out, and I'm still full of gas and ready to go, right? The rare upgrade seems to go into what we expect is going to be a sacrifice-themed hero on Yzmir somewhere. If you manage to sacrifice this Stargazer, you can boost another one of your characters. So it becomes sort of a free sacrifice outlet, which is kind of neat. And in the meantime, turns into a straight-up 2/2/2/2/2, which you're probably not going to spend your rare upgrade just doing that, even in Yzmir, right, where you're used to your characters being a little weak. Getting a blank 2/2/2 for 2 cost is probably not what you're doing, but if you're on that sacrifice theme, you're very interested in this rare, I would assume. The Axiom faction shift gives it a 1/1/1/2/1. I think Axiom has a rare that is a 1/1/1/1/2. I guess this gives you a little bit of a mountain flavored version of it if you want it. Lets you get a different shape of a 1-cost character in your deck, I guess. You know, some of these faction shifts could be filling holes. For instance, maybe Axiom just doesn't have, you know, a 1-cost character that has 2 mountain, but they have different versions out of the other 2. We'll see when we see the full card pool, but you know, obviously some of these faction shifts are just going to be, you know, they have to shift into something. The Lady of the Lake is next. Kind of neat, 2/2/1/1/3. You know, again, technically below static because you'd like to get 6 points for your 2 mana, but you get that water focus. She's, you know, certainly very good in that water only region, or, you know, if you run into a point where at least winning water gets you somewhere, your opponent's in that region. So kind of a nice one. You know, gets to beat a 1/1/1 straight up. Not too bad. The rare upgrade gives you a very interesting support ability where you can make your next spell not fleeting anymore. That's obviously going to depend on what fleeting spells are in your deck, how good that is or isn't. You're kind of trading a card in your reserve to get a card in your reserve, right? You're giving up Lady of the Lake and you're getting a spell in there instead. Really neat. Full card pool, check out what spells you have available. I'm sure we're going to see a bunch of spells later on here. The Bravos gets to do this with a character, and we know that the Tracer exists and they probably have other fleeting characters that they might play. Or, I guess in that case, or even in Yzmir's case, you can use this if you're going to play a card out of your reserve, whether it's a spell or a character, and allow it to go back into your reserve later, which is pretty neat. All right, the next one's Baba Yaga. 3/2 for 2/1/2. Yeah, we're going extra understated, but that's because she draws a card out of your hand, right? So you're paying a bunch up front to get that extra card draw. One of those things, kind of like in other decks, I don't think Yzmir has any permanents, but it's that kind of thing where you're definitely giving up today, but you're hoping that that card you draw, in the long term is going to make your plays better enough that it's worth taking the little hit now. And it's not as big as playing, a pricey permanent. You're probably paying, one, quote-unquote, 1.5 mana extra to get this. Putting a 2-cost 2/1/2 blank in your reserve, not great, but, it's fine. You could certainly have Baba Yaga in your deck, and especially if you're playing some fleeting spells, you're going to need some card supply. You'll probably be interested in playing her. This is a rare character stat upgrade that I kind of like. 3 costs for 3/2/2 is, quite a bit more palatable, I think. You get to put it up against a 2/2/2. You still draw your card. You get to beat the 2/2/2 if you care about Forest. And you get to play it as a 2-cost 3/2/2 out of your reserve. I kind of like this one. You just offhand, it's only 2 stats, but it's 2 stats on both plays. And, on the second play, you are getting something that's actually a little overstated out of it. And you're still getting to draw that card, so that's pretty good in my eyes. Ortis gets just the straight-up Yzmir rare in Ortis. I'm not sure what kind of... I don't think the Ortis deck that we've seen is that starved for card draw or anything like that, but there could be different... I guess Charge is a fleeting spell, right? And they have some permanents, so maybe they do want that card draw, but this gives them access to it, right? And they probably don't have too much of that on their own. I know we saw that previewed Sacrifice card also has a faction shift into Ortis. Alright, next the Ceran Alchemist. This one's pretty straightforward. He is a unusually just uncurved character for Yzmir. You get a 3-cost 3/3/3. You play him from your reserve, you get a 1-cost 1/1/1. Very nice role player. Can help you get through those early days without, just falling behind on a raw stats basis before you have enough mana to really start doing your time advantage tricks and really, kind of get that I have 4 mana and you're done kind of edge that Yzmir is looking for. The rare upgrade simply becomes a 3-cost 4/4/4 the first time you play him. Equivalent, kind of a standard rare upgrade, but even just, getting that standard rare upgrade on a character in Yzmir does have some appeal. Ortis gets, straight up the same version. Ortis probably likes this guy mostly because you get the 1-cost 1/1/1 coming out of your reserve later. So they get to do, sort of the split difference where you get the nice solid unit at first, and then you get another cheap guy later, for your token swarm antics. Next, kind of a neat one, Alice, 3/3/2/2/4. Out of reserve, you can burn her for an after you. So if you're really... Alice is really good if you're plotting a big, expensive play. If you're plotting, we'll see Dorothy shortly here. We'll see Sakaru shortly here. If you want to spend no mana and just make your opponent do absolutely everything they're going to do before you figure out how you're just going to burn everything on this big character play, Alice is very good for that. The rare upgrade, kind of a standard deal. You're getting 2 stat points on each play, which is a pretty normal thing to see for a rare upgrade. Does turn her into a slightly overstated character. And this is sort of an interesting one, though, because I feel like in a lot of cases you're going to use that reserve ability. And so if you're going to use that, then you're only getting that 2 stat bonus once. So it's an interesting balance on that one. But that kind of, explains why she's allowed to be sort of a little overstated in Yzmir. on the rare thing, even though she also has an ability that's that good. Kind of a neat one for Lyra. Lyra gets the full Yzmir rare version of this. I cannot imagine they have access to After You on their own. So this gives them, some leeway. I could see them wanting After You with all of their like X0, X characters. Their characters have 0 stats in one biome or another. Getting to see what your opponent does helps you maybe decide what to do with those guys a little bit more easily. Alright, next up we have the aforementioned Dorothy Gale. Dorothy is a bomb in the Yzmir deck for sure. 5 cost, 3 out of reserve. The difference is because when you play her the first time, you just get to send any character to the reserve. It doesn't matter how much they cost. There's no restriction on this. In one fell swoop, you are getting rid of probably, ideally, what you would like to do is get rid of a 3 or 4 cost character on their side and get a 3 cost, get a 3/2/2 on yours. And so you get a lot of mana efficiency out of this if you banish the right thing. And you can really just swing a day with, a well-timed Dorothy play just on her own. If you do the Yzmir thing, you get them to use up their stuff. You still have 5 mana left after all of that. You just put Dorothy in just the right place. You can turn, what might have been a, losing 1-0 or 2-1 situation into a 2-1 or even a 2-0 in your favor if you find the right place and time to play Dorothy. And you just make your opponent's going to play around this for sure as best they can. If you keep 5 mana open as Yzmir, they're gonna know, right? At least out of these starter decks. The rare upgrade lets you do this twice, which is pretty compelling. The second time is face up, right? She's sitting near reserve. They're gonna know she's there instead of being like, well, I just kind of have to hope you don't got it, right? Which is something you might do a lot of the time against an Yzmir deck. But interesting nonetheless. It is, you are paying more out of reserve, so you lose the ability to just get that basic 3 cost 3/2/2 later. You have to pay 5 for it the second time, but certainly very powerful effect, right? You get your bomb play twice, or make your opponent play around it or sabotage it or something. Bravos gets straight up Dorothy. They don't really have the time delay stuff that Yzmir has to really, really make her work. But if they're interested, right, they are allowed to play her as a rare shift. And the other big pricey character for Yzmir is Sakaru. Oh, Sakaru. There's an extra R in there. 7 cost, but when you play him from your hand, you get to send your opponent's expedition back a space, which is, that is a huge effect. Now, normally, if you start a day by slamming down Sakaru, your opponent's probably going to be able to look at your entirely spent mana and a 4/4/4 on the field, and figure out how to make the most of that in a way that maybe means you didn't really get a whole lot out of playing him in the first place, outside of, we only played 1 card instead of 2 or 3. But we're Yzmir, we can use a Kesha to make them do something, we can use an Alice to make them do something. If we have 8 mana, we can play a 1-drop to make them do something, and try to get a lot of information before dropping this guy. Again, another situation, a smart opponent's going to try to play around that a little bit if they can. But you don't get to play around your expedition moves back, right? It's not always, and it's not always possible to sort of dance around, well, where's the 4/4/4 going to land? Rare upgrade, pretty neat. You get a 5/5/5 instead, a little bit harder for your opponent to just kind of work around or react to if you have to do him up front. And if you don't like him out of your reserve, you get to toss him to just draw a full card, giving up a quote-quote half card to get a full card. But notable on both versions, you are allowed to play him the second time as a nice, a 4 cost 4/4/4, which is sort of fair stats. Granted, at 4 cost, you're hoping to do a little bit better than that, but rare version says 4 cost 5/5/5. Perfectly fine to have coming out of your reserve, especially with some of the time delaying going on. But if you don't like that, you get to draw a new card. Kind of a neat rare upgrade. The faction shift is into Bravos, who we've seen one long ago prototype Bravos card that indicated they might have some sort of a ramp character somewhere. So he would fit in with that, I assume. Alright, on to the spells, which there's going to be a few here. First is Off You Go. Just kind of a generic 2 cost, get rid of something that costs 3 or less. If you hit a 3 with this, you have quote-unquote 1 on mana. Very tricky card for your opponent to deal with, to play around. They kind of can't to an extent. They sort of just have to let you hit this because, you're going to have 2 mana open or more quite often. So pretty good bread and butter for them. It is 4 out of the reserve, which makes it expressly inefficient, but it is there, and it'll be available to you. The rare upgrade just gives you some better upfront efficiency. You have to pay 3 now, but you can get rid of something that costs 5 or less. You know, one of the ways you do get to sort of play around Offie is to just try to rely on an expensive character. If they sneak a copy of the rare into the deck, or, you know, they play 3 of them, then you don't really get to do that because now it hits everything. But at least it costs them 3. It's still 4 out of the reserve, so you can actually play it efficiently out of the reserve this way too. Faction shift into Lyra, giving them, you know, a different form of removal compared to what they normally get. I believe they have cards that like make something fleeting or things like that, and this gives them a straight removal option if they want it. Next spell, Spycraft. This is one of our fleeting spells. It's just you sabotage and then resupply. We talked before, 2 mana sabotage, pretty good. Instead of getting a 1/1/1 body like you do on Tooth Fairy, you get a resupply out of it. The Spycraft itself is fleeting, you know, so you're not necessarily going to get to do that twice, so the resupply sort of replaces the fact that you're not getting a card into your reserve there. But, you know, pretty nice. It can be nice to have, you know, compared to the Tooth Fairy, for instance. You're getting a 2-cost 1/1/1 in your reserve there, right? And Spycraft says that, okay, you're not going to get a 1/1/1 body out of me, but you're probably going to get something better than a 2-cost 1/1/1 on that resupply. So a bit of a different shape. Kind of will often feel a little bit better if you resupply into anything nice at all. The rare upgrade takes away the fleeting thing, lets you play it for 3 the second time. Turns into, you know, not card advantageous card, but a card even card, right? You play the Spycraft, you get a card back. You play it the second time, you get a card back. But they're both reserve cards, so you're only getting quote-unquote half a card out of those. And you get this face-up sabotage in your reserve just being really annoying. You know, there's not a whole lot of sabotage out of reserve, but when you have it, and it's there, and your opponent knows it's there, you know, they might play around the possibility of one in your hand, but if it's in their reserve, they have to play around it, right? And this is a faction shift into Lyra once again. Lyra has, I want to say they have some resupply thematics. I might be, Axiom definitely does. I think Lyra has a little bit of it. We've seen some resupply cards get shifted into Lyra from other places. So this fits right in with that. And, you know, gives them a cheap sabotage option as well. Next spell, Banishing Gate. Straight up, 4-cost, fleeting, discard something. Note that this says discard, not send to reserve. So even if something's not fleeting, it's still just gone. For 4-cost, you're probably going to be a little inefficient with this. A lot of the time, you're going to hit a 3-cost. You're going to have to hit a 3-cost sometimes, but the fact that you get rid of it all the way is very good. It is itself fleeting, so it's kind of fair in that sense. The rare says, now we don't have to be that fair. We're just going to send it straight to discard, and we can come out of the reserve at a 5-cost if we want to. Again, that's even more expensive, even more quote-unquote inefficient, but, you know, as with all the expensive Yzmir plays, if you've done a good job with the time delay stuff, you can be okay with doing this mana inefficient plays because they're going to be, you know, really, really well placed. Ordis gets the shift here. Kind of an interesting card for them. The other couple Ordis card removal cards we've seen have had some restrictions on them, so this gives them an unrestricted, albeit pricey option, which might be fine for them. And then yet more removal, the third removal card in Yzmir's kit. Kraken's Wrath, the token destroyer card, costs a big 5 mana, you know, like a number of other things we've seen in this deck. There's some really cheap stuff and some really expensive stuff and only a scattering of things in between, because you're trying to use the cheap stuff to, you know, make the big expensive stuff land for the most value. 5-cost fleeting, send to reserve up to 3 target characters, and they can sum up 5 costs or less. So it cannot quote-unquote be mana efficient, unless you're getting rid of tokens that your opponents maybe paid some mana into, and then it can be quite mana efficient. Right, so a bit of a, you know, a hit and miss card against just like a Lyra deck or something. It's still going to be fine, right? You still get to bomb, you know, 2 or 3 characters from their field. It's still really good. But it's really going to shine when you get to get rid of 2 tokens at a 4-cost, right? Or really against Axiom, you know, get rid of 3 Brass Bugs is pretty good for 5 mana. So not a niche card because, you know, there's what, 3 different factions that have tokens right now. But certainly a card that's going to be better in some places than others. The rare upgrade kind of just doubles down on what it's already good at doing. You get to hit up to 4 characters now and 1 extra mana hand cost out of that. Same overall dynamics, but you know, if you really want to go after like orders in particular, and getting rid of 3 soldiers isn't that exciting, well, now you can get rid of 4. And Axiom gets the faction shift on this rare, and they get the full 4 targets cost 6 or less. Axiom kind of another deck that, depending on the hero, we haven't seen the other 2 heroes yet, but you could see, you know, wanting to set up all these permanents, maybe taking a little time, maybe they need something like this to help deal with decks that are trying to overwhelm them or something. And that is it for the cards in the starter and their families. There are, of course, a couple 1x faction shifts in this starter. And not all of the rares of the cards we've looked at are in the starter. But in terms of picking 5 to roll with, I wound up doing this. So the rares that we got options for are, we got the rare Tooth Fairy as a 1x. We got rare Baba Yaga, Kadigan, Alice, Dorothy, Sakaru. And then 2 shifted in Beauty Sleep from Lyra, which is the 1 cost put something to sleep. And the Monolith Archivist, which we haven't actually seen yet. Was not in the Orders starter. We talked about it in the Orders video anyway. But this is an interesting, 2 cost 3/3/3 that cannot win you the expedition, but can stop you from losing one. So with my picks here, I kind of really doubled down on just trying to get the most character efficiency I could. That's kind of where I would start with this as my first go, is try to like level up my character options so that I still have the core Yzmir things where I'm buying time to play a Dorothy, I'm buying time to drop a Sakaru, and things like that. I'm still playing the Baba Yaga. But to get through those early days, I wanted to sort of focus on having good early character options. So we're playing the Archivist, we're playing the Tooth Fairy. We are at 6 Sabotage cards in this deck, which I think is an interesting angle to try. We're playing the ranked up Baba Yaga, the ranked up Ceran Alchemist. And then after that, we could play... We're basically between Alice, Dorothy, and Sakaru. We have to pick one of those, I went ahead and cut Beauty Sleep. You could do a version of this where you're playing the Beauty Sleep, maybe you cut Kraken's Wrath or something, but then you have to give up a rare upgrade somewhere. But I'm going to go ahead and include Kraken's Wrath. In like a starter deck environment, the Ordis deck is such a problem. I just want to have Kraken's Wrath available, even if it's just going to be mana a lot of the rest of the time. I went ahead and took the upgraded Sakaru for this. I think the quality of life of playing this guy probably feels pretty substantially better at 5/5/5. And it's one of those upgrades where if you do play him twice, you're getting 3 stats twice, which is above rate for a rare upgrade, so to say. Granted, he costs a bazillion mana, so that's pretty fair. And the draw card flexibility, if you resupply him in, you can just burn him right out. And I gave up on the upgraded Alice. It is probably the bigger loss here. As mentioned before, if we want to use the After You support ability, then we don't get the benefit of that stats twice. We only get it once, and it's still fine once, but, I went ahead and cut that in favor of the Sakaru. And Dorothy, I think in a constructed Yzmir deck where you don't have 9 copies of removal spells, maybe the double Dorothy play is more interesting, but we're playing all of them here, so I don't think we really need the rare Dorothy going on here. I'd rather be able to play her for 3 out of the reserve, I think. So yeah, that's what I would do with this deck if I was doing the starter deck starting off the game angle. Let me know what you think. Let me know, would you pick different rares here? Have you I believe the demo decks have the rare Dorothy in them. Have you had a lot of success playing her twice, for instance? Have you, if anybody's played with Studious Disciple, on one of the like fan-made clients or something, how they feel about that card? I neglected to mention that card got cut entirely because I'm playing 2 of the 1x rares, which means I need to cut something. And I just don't have a lot of excitement about paying 1 for a 0/1/1 that... The mana might be worth it, right? But I don't know, I'm not feeling it, so we cut that guy. a little bit slower out of the gates. We don't get the like day one cost guy. We don't actually have any of them here, but he's not necessarily helping us win unless they play a 3 cost somewhere anyway. So that'll wrap it up for this Yzmir deck and for this series of starter family videos. I'm probably gonna do at least 1 or 2 sort of theory thinking about stuff, comparing rare upgrades maybe in general across the board or something like that, or just other stuff will come up in the news as we go through this Kickstarter here, which is already been a huge success for day 1, and we'll see where it goes from there. But yeah, hope you enjoyed these, and stay tuned for the next one, whenever that may be. Might be a week or 2, but yeah, take care.